The recent Pokemon entries have been not very fulfilling to say the least. Although you still can have plenty of enjoyment from the games, many Pokemon fans most likely finish the games only to never touch them again, or straight up don't finish them at all. So in this case, you, a Pokemon fan, who wants to continue playing something from the series you adore, yet can't find anything intriguing in the latest games and has played plenty of the older releases that they have started to feel stale, what do? Well, turn to the community of people with the same thoughts as you, whom have turned their own ideas and takes on the franchise that you can experience like a new Pokemon game. You also get to go on grand new adventures with your favorite creatures in games made by passionate fans with unique takes on the Pokemon IP you hold so dear to your heart. So what are these fan-edited games called? Well, it's pretty simple actually. They are So, present day, we got fan-made hacks that in some cases beat the official Pokemon games themselves, ROM hacks like Pokemon Unbound, Pokemon Crown, and a personal favorite of mine and many others, which is Pokemon Emerald Rogue. There's also improvement hacks that modernize our favorite classic Pokemon entries to spice them up or give us an intriguing challenge, like Pokemon Radical Red, Renegade Platinum, and Emerald Kaizo. There's also demakes to give us an experience of the new games in the old style, like Pokemon GS Chronicles and whatnot. But the point is, there's a lot, and I mean a lot, of Pokemon ROM hacks that each offer something new. How did we get to this point? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's exactly what we'll be looking at today. But before we fully start, let me quickly explain the difference between Pokemon ROM hacks and Pokemon fan games, since there easily can be confusion about the distinction between them. Pokemon ROM hacks, to keep it simple, are modifications of existing games that are already made. As an example, let's use Pokemon Fire Red. If you take the game and alter its assets, code, scripts, or make any other sort of changes to it, it's called a ROM hack. Pokemon fan games, on the other hand, are completely new game creations made from the ground up, which most commonly are made with the RPG Maker engine. Specifically, Pokemon Essentials, which is a template for starting your own Pokemon fan game projects. So, now that we know the difference, let's actually dive into the depths of Pokemon ROM hacking lore and find out the beginnings to the unofficial games we love to play till this very day. As you most likely could expect, the start of Pokemon ROM hacking was pretty close to the franchise's start itself. The earliest ROM that's still findable on the internet is Pokemon Trap Edition, which is a minor edit of Pokemon Blue and was released sometime at 97 or 98. Of course, since it's the first one, the changes made to the game were pretty primitive and slim, but due to the technology and the level of game hacking at the time, it's to be expected. Although this technically counts as the first ever hack, there is a good possibility that there were ROM hacks created even earlier than Pokemon Trap. So, when were actually ROM hacks that completely changed the game made? I'll get to it soon, but before that, I wanted to talk about the controversial history of hacks that the Pokemon ROMs had. Even though the changes were text edits and simple sprite swaps at the most, Pokemon ROM hacks were infamous at the time for their crude and edgy nature. The one that I could gather the most info about, and also seems to be the most well known and documented, is Ice Age's Gen 1 hack called Pokemon. Yeah, it's that type of ROM. The game had things such as different sprites like the protagonist being Chris from Gen 2, but the thing that gave Ice Age's hack the most buzz was the dialogue with NPCs and the name changes for the Pokemon. Behold such mighty names like Sparky, Kokran, and the big boy himself, Speary! What a loud little fella, ain't he? Even though the hack is lost mostly due to time, after a lot of searching you can find the ROM hack if you so desperately desire to test it out. I wouldn't want to miss out this award-winning dialogue either. let's move on from the edgelord age of hacks and talk about the actual first competently made hack that you most likely still have heard about even to this day. Well, there is a hack for Crystal in 2002 called Pokemon Crystal version. Team Rocket, prepare for trouble. But it's still kind of low scale compared to the actual big ROM that I wanted to mention. Pokemon Brown, which is a hack of Pokemon Red that was made by Cool Boy Man in 2004 and surprisingly was supported with updates for around 15 years. So what's so special about this ROM? Isn't it just another ROM, but with a few more simple changes instead? Oh no, it's way more than that. Remember the crude ROM hacks I mentioned a few moments ago? Well, that was what you usually could expect from a Pokemon hack at the time. So, with something like Pokemon Brown getting introduced, it completely changed the Pokemon ROM hacking community. Brown showed that if you gave enough effort and took your time, it was possible to rework the engine and revamp the game into a completely new experience with your own story, Pokemon designs, maps and inner workings. Something completely unseen at that time, which shaped and totally transformed the standards of what a good Pokemon ROM hack actually could be. Following this, Pokemon ROMs were no more the black sheep of the community, but instead now started to become an artistic part of the fanbase that was starting to be embraced and enjoyed. But little did people know that this was only the start of this ever-evolving story of game hacking innovation. But hey, at least hacks aren't only known for their detrimental status to the community anymore. Well, mostly. One of the main reasons that fan-made Pokemon games are somewhat safe from getting consistently bombarded by DMCAs from the Nintendo Ninjas is the fact that there is no transactions, payments, or any other sort of similar distribution being done for the ROMs of the Pokemon games. So it's pretty much like getting punched by someone in school, but both of you end up being in trouble. Pretty understandable by the ROM developers to act like that, in my opinion. Now that the amount of Pokemon hacks were increasing with each day, more unique and varied ROMs started to appear, some even becoming so popular that they themselves began to have small communities of their own. The main types of these Pokemon ROM hacks are difficulty or improvement hacks. The most popular instances are ones that you definitely have heard of, Radical Red and Emerald Kaizo. For those that aren't familiar with these hacks, the ROMs have noticeably increased difficulty by increasing enemy levels and improving trainer AI, while also creating way more challenging Pokemon teams to fight against. To give players a better chance at beating the game, there usually also are Pokédex expansions and extra quality of life features from modern Pokemon entries, while having some Pokemon stats and move pools increased and improved to give them also a better chance at usage. Pokédex hacks. Hacks that make all Pokemon available, from starters to mythical Pokemon in a national dex style, while also having no version exclusives and making usually hard to evolve Pokemon way easier to obtain, like trade evolutions instead evolving with easier conditions, for example Gengar on level 45 at night or Milotic at max happiness. One of the most popular hacks of this kind are ROMs such as the famous Blaze Black and Volt White. Remake hacks. Although more of a vague category, in my opinion it definitely has a place in this list. These games are either recreations of existing Pokemon games, like Pokemon GS Chronicles, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee Game Boy Advance, and Pokemon Sword and Shield GBA, or also can be hacks that take existing media and turn them into new Pokemon-like experiences. For example, Dragon Ball Z Team Training and Digimon Fire Red. And lastly, full or complete hacks. If the title doesn't already explain it, these hacks are completely new overhauls of the games that introduce new Pokemon, characters, region, graphics, gameplay, and plot. The ones that match these descriptions the best are Pokemon Unbound, Pokemon Glazed, Pokemon Gaia, and Pokemon Source. As you could expect, these type of ROMs are in a smaller amount compared to the rest, since to create a full new game like that, it would take a whole lot of time, passion, and dedication without any pay. Speaking of payment, we all know the iffy relationship that fan creations and remakes of Nintendo IPs have with the dream crusher Nintendo itself. Although it does not count as a ROM hack, we all know of the sad story about Pokemon Uranium and the shutdown of the surprisingly great fan game that was Pokemon Brick Bronze. So, compared to the fan-made games and creations involving Pokemon, how are Pokemon ROM hacks safe from the same fate? Well, that's the thing, they aren't. The most popular case of this issue is the story of Cool Boy Band's hack, Pokemon Prism. Suddenly, one day in 2016 out of the blue, Cool Boy received a cease and desist from Nintendo to not only shut down the development of Pokemon Prism, which was in development for 8 years, but also take down his other beloved games of Pokemon Brown and Pokemon Region Adventures. You may be wondering, wait, isn't Pokemon Prism still available? Well, you would be correct for thinking that. Although Cool Boy Man did take down all of his games, an uncompleted build of the ROM hack was leaked on, of course, 4chan by an anonymous user, which was version 0.91, but 3 updates were made by a group of developers called Rainbow Devs. But wait, if the ROM hacks were ordered to be taken down just like that, why haven't been other ROMs taken down, or rather, what was the cause of the DMCA? That's the thing. The reason was so simple yet stupid. If you did not know, Cool Boy had a website for his Pokemon fan games, which had one small yet very relevant word incorporated into its description that made Nintendo feel like the DMCA was necessary. The info text about the site mentioned that it identifies as the official website for Pokemon Brown, Prism and Region Adventures, which apparently infringed on Nintendo's intellectual property rights, hence causing Nintendo to have a hissy fit and cause the takedown of the passionate craft. As for the rest of the hacks, the line is blurry, but technically legal, as long as you don't make money anyway from your ROM or just have common sense. As for some of the most notable hacks from this time, they are Pokemon Shiny Gold, the same old Pokemon Brown still being relevant, Pokemon Rocket's Revenge and Pokemon Azure Horizons. While experiencing and seeing multiple new ROM creations by many talented people for a few years, the thing that gave a platform for all of this to happen, known as the internet, was constantly having an ever-expansive development of its own in the background. But how did this affect ROM hacking? Due to the constant refinement and simplification of how to use the internet, the community not only had more opportunities to expand with new people, but also thanks to the rise of forums like Poke Community and other helpful sites to gain more knowledge about the wonders of creating ROM hacks, like the good old Hypercam tutorials on YouTube, the skill ceiling for creating hacks of your own started to constantly fall, which allowed way more people to give it a shot at ROM hacking as well. Of course, the people who already had experience with creating hacks or having a much better understanding of necessary things gave them way more tools to develop way more higher standard hacks that blew many people away. But on the other end, now that it was way less intimidating, there were more people that started creating Pokemon hacks, which in most cases, because of the small experience they had, resulted in subpar creations or unique games that also were affected by the creator's age. In result of these outcomes, there started to appear ROMs that heavily varied in quality, hence dividing the overall bunch of these games to be split into two. On one side, ROM hacks that are so bad it's funny, or just so horrible that the inexperience is very noticeable. And on the other side, the hacks that were worth playing through fully to have a great time, or just becoming the definition for what a common ROM should aspire to be. For example, the hack that introduced me to ROM hacks, Pokemon Light Platinum. Although it not having stuff like new Pokemon or big new quality of life features, the new plot, graphics, bigger amount of catchable mons and whatnot easily make up for that. Although aging somewhat poorly and comparing to recent releases, it does not hold up as great, but for the time, It was one of the closest official feeling Pokemon games you could get, so it cannot go unmentioned. I mean, it did come in second place 3 times in a row for the best hack of the year in Poke Community polls. Some more mentions could be for the also popular Pokemon Glazed, which I remember solely because of my memories of my best friend in middle school regularly telling me about it and how he enjoyed it so much more than the official games. I mean, there's definitely people that agree with 2013's Retro's best friend, so that probably can give you a good idea. Other notable ones are Pokemon Adventure Red, Pokemon Gaia, Pokemon Liquid Crystal, and many more. Wait, notable? Did I say notable? How can I talk about important hacks relevant to this topic if I don't talk about the creator of the ROM hacks, who is also commonly known as the... Known for his widely popular and played Pokemon difficulty hacks, Drayano is not only one of the people which have majorly contributed to the rise in popularity of Pokemon ROM hacks, but also a longtime member of the community. Although his story begins around the year of 2009 with his account being created, I wanted to talk about the impact of him and his games in this time period due to them starting to take off and get massive engagement from the Pokemon community and gain massive appeal for the ROMs he made that are still popular even today, which started sometime in 2012 or 13 with the release of Fire Red Omega. Although the hack's main appeal was just adjustments to the difficulty and quality of life, the thing that made Drayano's work stand out was the way he achieved the results. Now, sure, you could just throw in some extra Pokemon and increase the levels enemy Pokemon have, but in Drayano's case, he found a perfect line between a higher difficulty compared to mainline Pokemon games that became challenging, while also greatly improving the enemy's AI, which resulted in a far more consistent and engaging challenge. Now of course there are other stuff like usually having all of the Pokemon being in some way obtainable, but with the perfect recipe now crafted, he went on to create even more beloved hacks and innovate the difficulty hack sphere, especially since his hacks like Storm Silver and Wall to White were DS Pokemon game ROM hacks, which get modified way more rarely than the go-to Game Boy Advance games of Fire Red and Emerald. And not only did he become one of the, if not the most well-known Pokemon ROM developers, he also set a standard for what a ROM hack should and should not be, hence being usually the #1 pick for any person that wants to replay a Pokemon game with a bit more spice. I mean, it was pretty obvious that I was going to mention him at some point in this video, right? With time passing on and some people starting to feel a bit of staleness in the variation of available hacks, developers in the meantime started to experiment more and consistently work to improve upon their previous creations in the background. And after plenty of time passed, and finally were crossing the finish lines with their hacks, more and more ROMs were starting to appear with completely new mechanics, full new experiences that had a much larger scope and wider range of content made available. Impressive and never before seen creations were popping up on the internet that right before you noticed it, there were more great new games that went outside the limits of what we thought was possible for a Pokemon ROM hack. Ever wanted to get a Pokemon game that you possibly could get a far more higher playtime out of it than the massive one you already got? Let me introduce you to the easily one of the best fan-made Pokemon experiences of all time, Pokemon Emerald Rogue. The Pokemon ROM hack made by Pokabi, which is a roguelite take on Pokemon. You start the adventure by picking a starter and going on an adventure, in which you go down paths of your choosing, obtain new Pokemon and items along the road, while battling random notable trainers at the end of each section so that you hopefully can reach the end and battle the final boss. Now, that's a very simple and basic explanation of the hack, but that's because you either most likely have heard of it and don't need more, or know very well about it, or you somehow still haven't tried it out and I'm giving you a great opportunity to finally give it a shot. If that did not already change your thoughts of what's possible with hacks, then let's look at Pokemon Crown, a very promising, yet still in development Pokemon hack, which is an auto chess version of Pokemon, something like a simplified version of Teamfight Tactics or the definitely well-known game known as Clash Mini. Look, the point is, did you ever imagine in your wildest fantasies that not only a Pokemon game like this was possible, but also the fact that it was made just using the great but limited game known as Pokemon Fire Red as the base? Yeah, I didn't either. I mean, if we're getting such awesome new ROMs like this now, imagine what's to come in the near future. When developing Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, Ilka decided to use the Unity engine for the game's creation. And, as you know, Unity is pretty much the most widespread and well-known engine for aspiring, beginning, indie and many other sorts of developers due to it being free, having a huge quantity of tutorials and guides available, while having a lot of support and other special tools to use when working with Unity. So, when you create a new Pokemon game on an engine that's been used by many developers and coders around the globe, then release it to the public and right into those people's hands, you get results like the quickly growing Pokemon Switch ROM, known as Pokemon Luminescent Platinum. Finally, the thought of having all of the Pokemon in the same game is becoming no longer just a dream, while still also having great enhancements made similar to RetroNC hacks, which is straight up mentioned to be a heavy inspiration for the ROM. So, with all of what we've seen over the past years and the innovations made by the fans and creators who work to create the Pokemon games we've always dreamt of, there's still one question left unanswered. If a handful of fans can create something so stunning as Luminescent Platinum, or single devs can develop experiences like Emerald Rogue, how has it come to a point where these fan-made ROM hacks in many people's eyes are starting, if not already, outclassing the official games made by Game Freak? Although they are the ones who create the games from scratch by building the world, mechanics and whatnot, they still end up with stuff that starts to make the game's quality to be lacking, but that's a story for another day. Or just go watch one of those many videos already about the modern game quality. And just like that, the constantly developing story of ROM hacks ends here for now. But that doesn't mean ROM hacking anytime itself is going to stop. We got Pokemon ROM hacks that still keep getting updated, whole new experiences still in development like the previously mentioned Pokemon Ground, great new hacks being made in the background, while also having ROM hacking itself start to branch out in even more categories. Like Pokemon YouTube creators starting to have Pokemon games made of their own regions and stories they've spoken or told about on their channels, while also meanwhile being people who create or modify games specifically for their content. For example, some of my videos like adding Iron Moth into Platinum or straight up making a ROM in 24 hours for content. And a creator you may have heard about, Zen Mode, is also making underappreciated Pokemon viable in Pokemon games with changes that make sense or straight up just feel like logical missed opportunities. Then completes a full playthrough to showcase how simple, small changes can fully change a Pokemon's usefulness. Anyways, after learning about the history of Pokemon ROM hacks, from the very start to recent developments, I hope that you are as excited as I am for what the future of fan-created Pokemon games has to offer. I am RetroNC, and thanks for tuning in.